Here's our list of the top 10 longest life sentences given to teens. Number 10. Antonio Barbo. Antonio Barbo, one of the two teenagers accused of ending the life of an elderly woman, was sentenced to life in prison with eligibility for parole in 36 years Monday, August 12, 2013. According to court documents, Antonio Barbo and Nathan Papp decided to rob Antonio's great-grandmother. What happened next was out of a horror movie, as the elderly woman was beaten before being struck several times with a hatchet. Antonio pleaded no contest to first-degree intentional homicide, part of a plea deal. With the plea deal, Antonio changed his plea from not guilty by mental disease or defect to no contest. In a statement, he said, "I know I don't show my emotions, I myself am not sure why, but that doesn't mean I don't. I took away someone's mother, grandma, sister, friend. I had no right to do so. Because of this one action I've decided to take, I've ruined so many lives." Antonio will be eligible for parole in 2048 when he will be 50. Number 9. Lionel Tate. Lionel Tate was the youngest American citizen to be sentenced for life in prison without the possibility of parole. Back in January 2001, he was convicted of ending the life of a girl in Florida. According to him, they were wrestling and he had her in a headlock when he jammed her into the table and then proceeded to stomp on her, which lacerated her liver. This is what he said, but her injuries told a different story. Her legs, feet, and neck all had serious bruises. Her other injuries included a fractured skull, fractured rib, and a swollen brain. These injuries were characterized by the prosecution as similar to those she would have sustained by falling from a 3-story building. Yeah, Lionel was sentenced to life imprisonment by Judge Joel T. Larzis of Broward County Circuit Court and said that the acts of Lionel Tate were not playful acts of a child. The acts of Lionel Tate were cold, callous, and indescribably cruel. Number 8. James Fairweather. On March 29, 2014, James Atfield, who had a brain injury, was stabbed to death in Colchester, Essex. James was a father of 5 and had brain damage after a car accident. He was lying on the grass at Castle Park after drinking when he was attacked by James Fairweather. He was found bleeding to death by paramedics who could not save his life. The violence committed towards him with over 100 stab wounds startled the police, and the BBC decided that the details were too gruesome to describe. 3 months later, on June 17th, Nahid Amina, a Saudi student from the University of Essex, was also stabbed and died. Her life ended in the overgrowth of Salary Brook near her home. James stabbed her in the abdomen before forcing the knife into her eyes and ultimately her brain so that she could not see evil. James was then apprehended while planning a third death in May 2015, and in January 2016 he pleaded responsible for both deaths. In April 2016 he was found guilty and was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 27 years. In court, James said that the voices had chosen James Atfield to be his victim, and the voices began to laugh as he stabbed him. Atfield had defensive wounds on his arms and hands, indicating that he was conscious enough to attempt to fight off Fairweather. Number 7. Alyssa Busmonte. Elizabeth Olten had her life taken by her neighbor, Alyssa Busmonte, in St. Martin's, Missouri on October 21, 2009. Alyssa lured Elizabeth into the woods and strangled and stabbed her to death. Alyssa ended her life simply due to homicidal ideation and to see what it was like to end someone's life. She was later indicted and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and armed criminal action and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of conditional release in 2024 for second-degree murder. However, due to her additional conviction of armed criminal action, even if she is granted conditional release in 2024, she will have a consecutive sentence of 30 years in prison. This makes her earliest probable release in 2054 when she will be 60 years old. Number 6. Nicholas Kendrowitz. Nicholas Kendrowitz ended the lives of his half-sister Desiree McCartney and stepbrother Nathaniel Ritz in Osgood, Indiana in 2017. Desiree died in May that year and Nathaniel died less than 3 months later. Nicholas put a towel over Desiree's head and set her free to heaven. He also suffocated Nathaniel, putting a blanket over his head. Nicholas was removed from the house after Desiree's death, but Local 12 has never been given any answers to what he was doing there when he ended the life of Nathaniel. Nicholas was a teen at the time of the deaths, but was convicted as an adult. The defense tried to paint Nicholas as suffering from serious mental health issues and never received the help he needed. Despite that, Judge Ryan King felt that he should spend decades behind bars, saying in the months and years following these deaths, Nicholas has never shown any remorse. Judge Ryan King sentenced him to 50 years in prison for each death to be served consecutively. Number 5. Jesse Osborne. The Townville school shooting occurred on September 28, 2016 in Townville, South Carolina. Jesse Osborne shot 3 students and a teacher, critically wounding student Jacob Hall, who died from his injuries 3 days later. Jesse, who also ended the life of his father before the shooting, was arrested as the sole suspect and charged with murder and attempted murder. The shooting started when Jesse drove into a fence of the school in a black pickup truck, got out of the vehicle, and began firing into the air, repeatedly shouting, "I hate my life." He then jumped the fence and began firing at people. Police received a 911 call on the shooting, and 15 minutes later the suspect was apprehended by a volunteer firefighter after his weapon jammed. According to Jesse, during his interview with the police, he threw his weapon and his vest away after realizing he was going to hell and called his paternal grandparents in tears to confess what he had done. A body, later identified as the suspect's father, was later discovered at the family home by Jesse's grandmother. The unintelligible call from her grandson prompted her to go to the home to investigate. Jesse was trialed as an adult, and on November 13, 2019, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole for the death of Jacob Hall and 30 years for the attempted murder charges. Number 4. Dexter Johnson. Dexter Johnson and 4 other teens carjacked and robbed Maria Appearce and her boyfriend Hoon Do while they sat in their car outside of Hugh's house. According to court records, Dexter and the others took the young couple to a secluded area where Dexter took advantage of Maria before he and another teen shot them both, ending their lives. The deaths were part of what Harris County prosecutors have described as a 25-day crime spree by Dexter and others that also included 3 other deaths. Dexter had been on death row since his conviction in 2007. He was to die in 2019, but he didn't due to his new legal team claiming he has an intellectual disability. His post-conviction lawyer had waited too long to argue that Johnson was exempt from execution due to his alleged disability, they said. An appeals court granted a stay so the judge can determine whether the convict met the revised diagnostic criteria for a person with diminished capacity. If he did qualify, the state would be violating Johnson's constitutional rights if they put him to death, his new team contended. Number 3. Martise Fuller. Prosecutors said Martise blamed his ex-girlfriend Kaylee Jugga and her mother for his expulsion from school and removal from the football team. The mother and daughter were upstairs in their home the afternoon of May 9, 2019, shortly after returning home from school. The family was preparing to go on a camping trip when Martise snuck through the open garage. Prosecutors had pointed to his intimate knowledge of the home, Kaylee's daily schedule, and that he had cased the home prior to the shooting. Kaylee was shot 5 times and died at the scene. Her mother Stephanie identified him as the person she came face to face with on the 2nd floor of her home, and she was later shot as she tried to hide. Martise plotted to get a weapon, ammunition from a friend, and had a relative dispose of the weapon. Judge Mary Kay Wagner said to Martise, you are a very dangerous and damaged human," and then sentenced him to life in prison without the opportunity for supervised release for Kaylee's death. The sentences for attempted murder and burglary are to be served concurrently to one another, consecutive to the life term. Number 2. Aiden Fucci. The body of Tristan Bailey was discovered on Mother's Day, May 9, 2021, hours after the teenager was reported missing by her family. She had been stabbed over and over and over again. Aiden Fucci was arrested on a first-degree murder charge in the death of Tristan. Aiden, at the time of the death, was a fellow student at Patriot Oaks and lived near Tristan. Aiden's girlfriend and other friends told investigators that he often talked about ending the lives of people and specifically said he planned to drag a random person into the woods and stab them. He entered his guilty plea in February 2023 at a hearing intended to get jury selection for his trial underway. He was charged as an adult, and during the sentencing, Circuit Judge R. Lee Smith said he took into account several factors when making his decision, including Aiden's age, the heightened level of premeditation, and that he was the sole participant who was not pressured by anyone to commit the devastating crime. He noted that Aiden was considered of average maturity by his peers and that he understood the consequences of his actions. Tristan suffered a painful and horrifying death from someone she trusted, and he was convicted of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison. And coming up at number 1 is Nikolas Cruz. On February 14, 2018, Nikolas Cruz opened fire on students and staff at the Majority Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. He ended the lives of 17 13 people and injured 17 others. Nicholas, a former student at the school, fled the scene on foot by blending in with other students and was arrested without incident approximately 1 hour later in nearby Coral Springs. The spree is the deadliest mass shooting at a high school in United States history, surpassing the Columbine High School that ended the lives of 15, including the perpetrators, in Colorado in April 1999. The shooting came at a period of heightened public support for gun control that followed mass shootings in Paradise, Nevada, and in Sutherland Springs, Texas, in October and November 2017. Nicholas has been formally sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole after a jury failed to unanimously recommend the death penalty, which disappointed and angered many of the families of the 17 people he took away.